What happens when a man who has everything decides the mother of his child is disposable? But he made one fatal miscalculation. A man at the absolute peak of the world, with a billion-dollar company and a portfolio of homes that spanned continents. To his adoring public, Connor Reeves was a visionary. An ending that involved his own CEO, a full tank of jet fuel, and the keys to his entire kingdom. This heir, 63 floors above the glittering sprawl of Austin, Texas, was thin, sterile, and smelled only of money and Windex. 4 months of carrying a secret that, until tonight, she had believed was a shared joy. Nexus Pay, the fintech startup they had poured their souls into, had gone public 6 months ago. They hadn't just become millionaires. They had catapulted into a stratosphere Lauren hadn't known existed. It seemed their history was now just another asset. He'd changed. It hadn't happened overnight. It was a slow erosion, a chipping away of the man she loved by the corrosive drip of wealth and adulation. Then came the friends. Leading this new flock was Katrina Beaumont, a public relations guru whose specialty was sculpting the public image of the newly wealthy. And a brand needed to be curated. Connor stepped out, looking like he'd been carved from marble. His dark hair was perfectly coiffed, his Tom Ford suit immaculate. "Hey," she said, her voice softer than she intended. He didn't look up. "Had a tasting at Per Se with the Hamiltons. We're thinking of backing his new fusion restaurant. It's a branding play." He finally pocketed the phone, his eyes scanning the room as if looking for a flaw. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. It wasn't a question. The morning sickness is more like all-day sickness lately. A quiet dinner, a bottle of sparkling cider for her, his favorite expensive scotch for him. "You need to push through that, Lauren," he said, his tone clipped, managerial. "These events are important. It's about visibility, presence. When you're not there, it creates a vacuum. People talk." A cold knot formed in her stomach. He waved a dismissive hand, walking over to the vast, minimalist bar. He poured himself a whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light. Lauren took a deep breath. "I have something to tell you. Something that's more important than narratives and branding." He took a sip of his drink, his back still to her. The cruelty of his indifference was a physical blow. She walked over to the kitchen island, her movements feeling slow and heavy. She pulled the framed photo from the drawer and placed it on the marble countertop, turning it to face him. "We're having a baby, Connor." It was heavier and more suffocating than any argument they'd ever had. Finally, he turned, his face unreadable. He walked slowly toward the island and looked down at the grainy black and white image of a tiny, comma-shaped being. Their child. Lauren held her breath, praying for a spark of joy, for the man she married to reappear. He looked up from the photo, his eyes meeting hers. There was only a chillingly calm, analytical Fraudeyer. 14 weeks, she whispered, her heart starting to pound a painful, frantic rhythm against her ribs. And in his eyes, she saw his verdict. "We need to talk about the trajectory of my life. Of our life." "Our life," she repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her. "That's exactly the problem," he said, his voice dropping. It was the voice he used when he was about to fire someone. "The brand, the company, it's entering a new phase. It's global. It requires a certain aesthetic, a certain kind of partner. And I'm not that woman," she stated, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. He had the decency to look away, to stare out at his glittering kingdom below. "You were perfect for the man I was, Lauren. Truly." He finally looked at her, his expression a mask of detached pity. "You're a wonderful person. But you're too ordinary for where I'm going." The words hung in the sterile air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. Ordinary. The woman who knew he was terrified of thunderstorms and sang off-key in the shower. The woman who held the copyright to his soul, or what was left of it. And the baby, she managed to choke out. Is our child going to be too ordinary for you as well? Of course not, he said quickly, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. The child will be a Reeves. He or she will have every advantage. The best schools, the best connections. He was talking about their baby, their life, as if it were a hostile takeover, a merger and acquisition. He wasn't dissolving a marriage, he was divesting from an underperforming asset. The fog of her love for him, which had blinded her to the slow, creeping horror of his transformation, had finally lifted. I see, she said, her voice eerily calm. He seemed relieved by her composure. Good. I knew you'd be practical about this. It's for the best, for everyone. He thought the conversation was over. He thought she would meekly accept his generous arrangement and disappear. He had no idea that in the ashes of her heart, a plan was beginning to form. A plan that was anything but ordinary. She wouldn't just leave. And she wouldn't be doing it alone. She thought of the one other person who had seen the change in Connor. The one other person who had a stake in the real soul of Nexus Pay. A man who, in a recent board meeting, had looked at Connor's flashy, reckless proposals with an expression of deep concern. Daniel Cole, the CEO of Nexus Pay, Connor's right-hand man. The questions delivered with the same impersonal tone he used with the household staff. The generosity he had promised arrived in the form of an email from his personal lawyer, a man named Jeffrey Pike, with a name as sharp and bloodless as his prose. The email, CC'd to Connor, outlined the terms of a proposed separation agreement. And the custody section. It proposed a joint arrangement, but with stipulations that clearly paved the way for Connor to assume primary custody once the child was old enough for a nanny and a boarding school. He wasn't just trying to erase her from his life. That was the moment the ice in her veins turned to steel. Grief was a luxury she could no longer afford. While Connor was the visionary, the public face, Daniel was the one who made the trains run on time. He was older, perhaps in his late 40s, with a quiet, observant demeanor that stood in stark contrast to Connor's burgeoning flamboyance. Lauren had always liked him. He spoke to her as an equal, asking her opinion on design elements for the new office, remembering the name of her favorite author after she'd mentioned it once in passing. More importantly, she had seen the look in his eyes during recent company events. As Connor boasted about buying a sports team or commissioning a multi-million-dollar yacht, Lauren had caught Daniel's gaze. It was a look of profound disappointment, a quiet alarm that mirrored her own. He was a steward of the company they had all built. Finding his private number was a risk. Lauren found it in a drawer of obsolete tech, a graveyard of his former life. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the contacts. It felt like a betrayal, a step into a world of corporate espionage she didn't understand. She dialed the number before she could lose her nerve. He answered on the second ring. Daniel, it's Lauren. Lauren Bishop. Connor's wife. There was a pause. No. No, it's not, she said, her voice cracking despite her best efforts. I need to talk to you. Urgently. And it has to be somewhere Connor will never find out about. Another pause, longer this time. She could imagine the calculations running through his head, the risk to his position, the implications of getting involved in his boss's domestic affairs. She was about to apologize, to tell him to forget it, when he spoke. There's a small coffee shop called The Daily Grind on 3rd and Brazos. It's old-fashioned. No one goes there. Can you be there in an hour? Be safe, Lauren, he said, and hung up. He stood up as she approached. Thank you for meeting me, she said, sliding into the booth. She spoke of her fear, not just for herself, but for her baby, and for the man Connor had become. Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression growing more grim with every word. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. Lauren, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not entirely surprised. "I've seen the change in him," Daniel said, his voice low. "The IPO. It did something to him. He started listening to the wrong people. Katrina Beaumont has him convinced that image is more valuable than substance. He's making reckless financial decisions, pushing for vanity projects that have no real ROI. He wants to acquire a luxury fashion brand, for God's sake. We're a payment processing company." He sighed, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. Now it was Lauren's turn to be unsurprised. Connor was shedding everyone who reminded him of his ordinary past, and that included the man who preached fiscal responsibility over flash. "The board is getting nervous," Daniel continued. "His erratic behavior, his spending. It's a liability. We're trapped." He looked around the dingy coffee shop, then leaned in closer, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, that's exactly what I want." And for the first time, Lauren saw the shrewd strategist that had helped build Nexus Pay from the ground up. "The jet is registered as a corporate asset," Daniel explained. "I, as CEO, have the authority to schedule it for company business. Emergency board meetings, site visits, investor relations. The justifications are endless." A slow, audacious idea began to dawn on Lauren. It was from a wild, terrifying thrill. It was audacious. It was perfect. He would be furious, Lauren breathed. He would be apoplectic, Daniel corrected her. "Where would we go?" "I have a house on the coast of Oregon. It's quiet, private, and under a different holding company name. No one would ever think to look for you there. It's the perfect place to lie low and plan your next move. And I've already got a name for you. The best family law attorney in the state, Audrey Kane. She eats men like Connor for breakfast." He wasn't just helping her. This was a coup, planned with the precision of a military operation. Her personal crisis was the catalyst he needed to protect the company they both cared about, the company Connor was driving into the ground. Their goals were aligned. "Why are you doing this, Daniel?" she asked quietly. "It's a huge risk for you." "Because I remember the early days. I remember Connor talking about changing the world of finance for the little guy. I remember you, sitting in our crappy little office, designing the user interface because we couldn't afford a graphic designer, making it simple and accessible for everyone. You were the original nexus of Nexus Pay, Lauren. You represent the soul of this company. He's forgotten that. I haven't." She wasn't alone. She had an ally, a powerful one. "Okay," she said, her voice firm, resolute. The night of the Innovators Gala, the penthouse was transformed into a parody of sophistication. Ice sculptures dripped onto priceless rugs, a string quartet sawed away in a corner, drowned out by the braying laughter of Connor's guests, and the air was thick with expensive perfume and ambition. Lauren watched the proceedings from the doorway of their master suite, a silent observer in her own home. She had claimed a sudden, debilitating migraine, an excuse Connor accepted with transparent relief. He was in his element, a champagne flute in one hand, the other gesturing expansively as he held court. The sight no longer pained Lauren. It fueled her. At 9:45 p.m., she received a text. Now. It was the signal from Daniel. Inside, there was no designer clothing or jewelry. She had packed 3 changes of simple, comfortable clothes, a copy of her favorite book, East of Eden, the framed ultrasound photo, and a small, worn-out photo album. Before the money, before the penthouse, before the hollowness had taken root in his eyes. It was her evidence, her reminder of what was real. Lastly, she packed Connor's old, discarded phone, the one with Daniel's number. On one side was a picture of them laughing on a park bench. She closed the locket. She left it open on the pillow of his perfectly made bed. A final, silent message. You cut the rope. The service elevator was deserted, the staff all busy catering to the gala. The driver, a large man with a calm, professional demeanor, simply nodded as she approached, taking her bag and opening the door for her. He didn't ask her name. What if Connor noticed she was gone? What if this was all a terrible mistake? The nexus. He offered her a hand to help her out of the car. "You made it," he said, his smile reassuring. It was the pinnacle of sterile luxury. A flight attendant, a woman with a professional, unquestioning smile, offered her a drink. Lauren asked for water. Just as Lauren began to feel a sliver of safety, a wave of relief, Daniel's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and the color drained from his face. "What is it?" Lauren asked, her stomach lurching. "It's a text from Connor's assistant," he said, his voice tight. "She says Connor wants the jet ready. He's planning an impromptu trip to Vegas with a few guests after the party. He's on his way here now." Panic, cold and sharp, seized Lauren. His perfect night, his perfect plan for a celebratory jaunt to Vegas. He would find her. "What do we do?" she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "He'll see me. It's over." Daniel's face was a mask of intense concentration. He looked out the window toward the gate that led to the tarmac. "It's not over," he said, his voice regaining its command. He pressed the intercom button. "Captain, this is Mr. Cole. We have a change of plans. The situation is more critical than we thought. We need to take off immediately. I am invoking executive priority. Acknowledge." "Acknowledged, Mr. Cole. Commencing final preparations for immediate departure." Daniel turned back to Lauren. The jet began to move, taxiing away from the hangar with a smooth, powerful surge. Lauren gripped her armrests, her knuckles white. She stared out the window, her heart in her throat. Even from a distance, she could see his rage. Lauren felt a tremendous force push her back into the plush leather seat as the plane accelerated. Faster and faster, the runway lights streaking past into a blur of white and blue. And then, with a feeling of impossible lightness, they were airborne. The plane banked sharply, and Lauren looked down. She could see the entire city spread out below her, a carpet of diamonds. She could see the flashing lights of the Escalade at the gate of the airfield. She could see the tiny, furious figure of her husband, growing smaller and smaller, until he was just another insignificant speck in the glittering metropolis he so desperately wanted to own. Tears streamed down her face, but they weren't tears of sorrow or fear anymore. They were tears of pure, unadulterated release. She was out. She was free. She looked across at Daniel, who was watching her with a quiet, steady gaze. He gave her a small, solemn nod. They flew on in silence, climbing higher and higher, leaving the life that was no longer hers far below. Lauren leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, her hand resting on her belly. For the first time in a long time, she felt a profound sense of peace. She wasn't just escaping. She was ascending. Connor Reeves stood on the tarmac, a solitary figure dwarfed by the cavernous expanse of the private airfield. The sound of the Gulfstream's engines, a roar he had always associated with his own ascent, now felt like a personal mockery. Each decibel was a note in a symphony of betrayal, a thunderous announcement of his own staggering ineptitude. He watched the navigation lights of his jet blink once, twice, before being swallowed by the vast, indifferent blackness of the Texas sky. Gone. For a full, breathless minute, he was paralyzed by a disbelief so profound it felt like a physical impact, winding him. The security guard, a man named George whose family's Christmas card was probably on his assistant's desk, was stammering about a security flag and CEO priority protocol. The words were meaningless static. The reality was a clean, sharp, impossible truth. Lauren, his quiet, predictable, ordinary Lauren, had just hijacked his life's most potent symbol and vanished. And she hadn't acted alone. The text from his assistant, which he now read for the 10th time, burned on his screen. Mr. Cole boarded the Nexus 10 minutes ago with an unidentified female guest. Destination, Portland. Daniel Cole, his loyal, plodding CEO. The man he'd hired to handle the boring minutiae so he could focus on the grand vision. The betrayal wasn't just audacious, it was illogical, a tear in the fabric of the world he had so meticulously constructed. The rage, when it finally broke through the shock, was not hot and explosive, but a glacial, terrifyingly clear fury. This was not a domestic squabble. This was a declaration of war. He stormed back to the Escalade, leaving the babbling guard behind. He jabbed at his phone, his fingers trembling with a rage that demanded an outlet. "Get Pike on the line." Now, he barked at his assistant through the car's speakerphone. The connection was made instantly. "Connor, what's going on?" "The party." "The party is over," Connor snarled. "Pike, listen to me very carefully. My wife and Daniel Cole have stolen my jet." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Jeffrey Pike, a lawyer who dealt in hostile takeovers and patent litigation, was not accustomed to calls about stolen jets. "Connor, slow down. Stolen is a legally specific term. Daniel is the CEO. He has operational authority to command corporate assets. Don't you dare quote bylaws at me, Jeffrey," Connor roared, the sound echoing in the leather-lined interior of the car. "He took my wife, who is in the process of leaving me, on my plane in the middle of the night under false pretenses. That is theft. That is kidnapping. I want them arrested. I want the FAA to ground that plane. I want his career reduced to a smoking crater before he even touches down." "And what do we tell the FAA, Connor?" Pike's voice was calm, a maddening counterpoint to Connor's frenzy. "That your CEO and your wife are flying to Portland. They'll ask if a crime has been committed. If you say yes, you'll be admitting to the world that you have zero control over your own C-suite. The story will be that the founder of Nexus Pay is so erratic, his own CEO had to spirit his wife to safety. The stock will open in a freefall. Is that the outcome you want?" Pike's logic was infuriating and impeccable. He was right. Daniel had built a cage of plausible deniability. To accuse him publicly was to immolate himself. The walls of his world, which had seemed so high and impenetrable, now felt like they were shrinking, pressing in on him. When he burst back into the penthouse, the dissonance was jarring. The string quartet was playing something light and forgettable, and the air was cloying with the scent of lilies and champagne. Katrina, a vision in crimson, glided toward him, her smile bright with manufactured delight. "Connor, darling, we were about to mutiny. A few of us are packed and ready for round 2 in Vegas." He looked past her at the sea of smiling, vacuous faces. The venture capitalists, the influencers, the social climbers. They were parasites, and he had willingly invited them to feed on him. His gaze was cold, reptilian. "The trip's off," he snapped, his voice a low command that sliced through the chatter. "Everyone needs to leave. The party is over. Now." The effect was instantaneous. Laughter died in throats. The music faltered into a discordant scrape. Anxious glances were exchanged. Within 15 minutes, the penthouse was empty, a battlefield of abandoned glasses and crushed canapes. The silence that descended was absolute, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. It was in this tomb-like quiet, wandering through the wreckage of his perfect evening, that he walked into the master suite. There, on the vast, empty expanse of his perfectly made bed, sat the open silver locket. He picked it up. The tiny picture of them, young and laughing, seemed to mock him from a forgotten era. And the inscription, "My anchor," felt less like a memory and more like a diagnosis. An anchor is what holds you in place. He had wanted to soar, untethered. He had cut the rope himself. The flicker of self-awareness was agonizing, a glimpse into an abyss of his own making. He quickly smothered it, transmuting the pain back into pure, cleansing rage. She would pay for this. They both would. At 3 a.m., sitting alone in his glass-walled office overlooking the sleeping city, he drafted the email. It was a masterpiece of corporate brutality, announcing Daniel Cole's immediate termination for gross misconduct, corporate espionage, and theft of assets. He sent it to the entire board of directors, a digital guillotine he was certain would end the rebellion. Then he sat back and waited for the affirmations of loyalty to pour in. Thousands of miles away, the Gulfstream's wheels touched down on a private, mist-shrouded runway on the Oregon coast. The moment the cabin door opened, Lauren was met not with the recycled air of her gilded cage, but with a cool, cleansing breeze that smelled of salt, pine, and damp earth. It was the smell of life, and she inhaled it like a drowning woman taking her first breath. A discreet sedan drove them to a house nestled in a secluded cove. It wasn't a monument to wealth like the penthouse. It was a home, a structure of warm cedar and vast panes of glass that didn't seek to dominate the landscape, but to become a part of it. Inside, a fire was already crackling in a stone hearth. "This is beautiful," Lauren breathed, running a hand along a worn wooden mantelpiece. "It's my sanctuary," Daniel said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "My grandparents built a small cabin on this land. I replaced it with this, but I tried to keep the feeling. You're safe here, Lauren. Completely off the grid." That first night, after Daniel showed her to a guest room with a window that looked directly out onto the churning Pacific, Lauren unpacked her small duffel bag. She placed the ultrasound photo on the bedside table. Then she took out the worn photo album and sat on the edge of the bed. She slowly turned the pages, looking at the images of the boy she'd loved, the boy with the goofy grin and the patched-up sneakers. The boy who had held her hand at her father's funeral. The boy who had whispered his dreams to her in the dark. It wasn't an act of mourning. It was an act of arming herself. This was her proof. This was her truth. For the first time in months, she slept a deep, dreamless sleep, the sound of the ocean a steady, protective lullaby. The next morning, Daniel was already at work, his laptop open on a large oak table. He looked up as she entered. "Connor made his move," he said, his tone grimly satisfied. "He tried to fire me via a 3 a.m. email to the board." "Can he do that?" Lauren asked, her heart sinking. "He could if he were dealing with an amateur," Daniel replied. "But my employment contract has a poison pill clause against summary termination. The board is legally obligated to launch a formal investigation. And they're spooked. They've called an emergency meeting for Friday." He slid his laptop around. "This is what I've been preparing." It was a dossier, a meticulously compiled file detailing Connor's increasingly erratic behavior, the reckless spending, the vanity projects, and now this unhinged reaction. Daniel was not just defending himself, he was building an unassailable case for a change in leadership. Later that day, Lauren met Audrey Kane. The attorney arrived not in a flashy car, but a practical Subaru, her demeanor all business. She sat with Lauren at the oak table, the fire crackling beside them, and listened to the entire story. When Lauren slid the separation agreement from Connor's lawyer across the table, Audrey scanned it, her lips tightening into a thin line. "This," she said, tossing the papers aside as if they were contaminated, "is an intimidation tactic, not a legal document. It's a classic move by a bully. He thinks because he has more money, he has more power. In my courtroom, Ms. Bishop, facts have power. And we are going to arm you with an arsenal of them." For 2 hours, Audrey laid out the strategy. It wasn't just about divorce and custody. "We will argue that your intellectual and emotional labor was a foundational component of Nexus Pay's success. The user interface you designed, the business plans you proofread. That wasn't a wife helping out. That was sweat equity. You weren't just his anchor. You were his partner. He will not be divorcing a homemaker. He will be separating from an uncredited co-founder. And we will demand a settlement that reflects that truth. Lauren felt a shift inside her. The last vestiges of the victim she had felt herself to be were burning away in the fire of Audrey Kane's righteous conviction. She was not a woman who had been left. She was a woman who had been wronged. And she was about to fight back. The emergency board meeting took place via secure video conference on Friday. Connor appeared from his penthouse office, framed by the Austin skyline, his suit immaculate, his face a mask of controlled fury. Daniel was in the Nexus Pay headquarters, calm and composed. One by one, the faces of the board members blinked into existence, a gallery of serious, worried expressions. Connor launched into his tirade, his voice dripping with venom. He spoke of loyalty and treason, of Daniel's manipulative influence on his emotionally fragile wife. He painted a picture of a corporate coup born from a domestic dispute, a narrative designed to make the board feel they were choosing between their founder and a meddling subordinate. When he finished, an uncomfortable silence filled the virtual room. Then Daniel spoke, his voice calm and measured. He didn't rebut the accusations directly. Instead, he shared his screen, presenting a slide deck filled with facts and figures, the disastrous ROI on the vanity projects, the stock analysts' concerns over Connor's recent public statements, the internal polling showing a decline in employee morale. He was dispassionately dissecting Connor's leadership, brick by brick. This isn't about a personal matter, Daniel concluded. This is about a pattern of erratic behavior and fiscal irresponsibility that poses an existential threat to this company. My actions were an extreme measure to protect shareholder value and corporate stability. Then Robert Chen, the lead director, cleared his throat. We have one other party who has requested to speak. A new window popped into the conference. Lauren. She was not where Connor expected her to be. Not in a hotel room or some anonymous apartment. She was in a warm, light-filled room, a roaring fire visible behind her. She looked serene, healthy, and unshakably calm. Connor's composure finally cracked. The sight of her, so clearly thriving outside of his orbit, was an unbearable insult. What is this? He sputtered. She has no place here. Lauren looked directly into the camera, her gaze finding Connor's on the screen. She saw the rage, the confusion, the crumbling facade of the Titan. She felt no pity. She felt only a quiet, resolute strength. Connor, she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the tension. You told me I was too ordinary for your new life. You tried to erase me from our shared history, and from our child's future. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle on the silent board members. You underestimated me. And you underestimated the soul of the company you built. It was never just about you. Her presence, her composure, her quiet power did more damage than any shouting match could have. She wasn't the unstable woman he described. She was the picture of rational grace. In that moment, the board saw the truth. The chaos, the instability, the liability. It all originated from one source, their founder. The fallout was swift and bloodless. The board voted unanimously to invoke a key person clause for an incapacitated executive. Connor Reeves was transitioned to the newly created, non-operational role of founder and chief visionary. He kept his fortune but was stripped of all authority. Daniel Cole was named chairman of the board, cementing his control. Connor sat in his glass box, stunned into silence, a king in a castle with no power, listening as the drawbridge was pulled up and he was locked inside. Audrey Kane's settlement was a masterpiece. Lauren received a share of assets that reflected her foundational role in the company, ensuring her and her child's future. More importantly, she was granted sole legal and physical custody. The king could have his kingdom. She had her child. Years passed, not in a blur, but in a beautiful, deliberate sequence of moments. The Oregon house, once a sanctuary, became a home filled with the sound of a child's laughter and the smell of baking bread. Lauren found love again, not in a boardroom, but with a local architect who saw the masterpiece in her, a man who cherished her ordinary days of painting and walking on the beach. Her daughter, Hope, grew up with salt in her hair and strength in her heart, knowing her mother not as a victim, but as the hero of her own story. Daniel, a true friend and steward, guided Nexus Pay back to its core mission, making it more successful and respected than ever. He'd often visit, becoming a beloved uncle to Hope, their bond a quiet testament to the alliance that changed all their lives. As for Connor, he remained in his gilded cage, a cautionary tale whispered in the high-stakes world of tech. He had everything money could buy, but he had lost the only things that ever truly mattered. Lauren, looking out at the endless ocean with her family by her side, knew she hadn't just escaped. She had built a new world, one where her worth was never in question. She had proven that the greatest empires aren't built on stock prices and public image, but on the unshakable foundations of love, integrity, and the quiet courage to write your own extraordinary ending. What did you think of Lauren's incredible story of courage and clever revenge? Let us know in the comments below. If you were moved by her journey, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and don't forget to subscribe for more true life stories of justice and empowerment.